My wife cheated with a millionaire, and my kids excluded me from their weddings. 8 years later, Marcus left them with nothing. But when they knocked on my door begging for money, my answer left them broken. I'm 50 years old. I work as the director of technology at my own consulting firm. And basically, I need to tell this story because after everything that happened, after 8 years of total silence, my past decided to show up at my door, asking for help as if nothing had happened. And honestly, I think I need to process all of this by writing it down, because I still can't believe that the same people who erased me from their lives now want me to solve their problems. I guess I should start at the beginning, when everything was normal, or at least I thought it was. Angela and I had been married for like 25 years, a quarter of a century. Can you imagine? We met when we were both in our 20s. She worked as an office manager, and I was just starting out in it. We had 2 kids, Daniel and Rebecca. We raised them together, paid the mortgage, did all the things that normal families are supposed to do. I worked hard. Really hard, to be honest, because I wanted my family to have everything they needed. Angela stopped working when Daniel was born. She was like 27 years old at the time, I think, and stayed home to take care of the kids. It seemed like everything was fine. I mean, we had our normal fights like all couples, but nothing that made me think something was wrong. About 9 years ago, when I was 41, I started noticing weird things. Angela had started going out more often, supposedly with friends from the gym, but she was always on her phone, that typical behavior of someone who's hiding something. She was dressing up more than usual to go to the supermarket, constantly buying new clothes, and when I asked her something simple like what time she'd be home, she'd get all defensive. At first, I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Like, we've been together so long that maybe I'm just inventing problems where there aren't any. But something in my gut told me there was more to it. One day, it was a Tuesday afternoon, I left work early because I'd finished an important project and thought I'd surprise her. I called her and she said she was at the mall with a friend, but her voice sounded weird, nervous. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to go to the mall to find her, and that's when I saw her. She was at a coffee shop, but not with any friend, but with a guy I didn't know. And it wasn't a casual meeting of friends. No, the way he touched her hand, how she laughed and leaned toward him, my whole body immediately knew what I was seeing. I stood there like an idiot for a few seconds, literally couldn't move my feet, and then I decided to follow them when they left the coffee shop. I followed them to a hotel, one of those discreet hotels on the outskirts of town, and I watched them go in together. I waited in my car for 2 hours, feeling like the stupidest human being on the planet. When they came out, she was still fixing her hair, and he kissed her before they each went to their cars. I drove home, grabbed some things, left a note that just said, "I know," and went to a motel. That night I didn't sleep at all. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the years we spent together, wondering how long this had been going on. The next morning, I hired a lawyer and started divorce proceedings. Angela called me like 50 times that day, but I didn't answer until evening. When we finally talked, the first thing she did was ask me what I had done, as if I was the one who had to give explanations. Can you believe it? I told her I had seen her, that I knew everything, and there was this long silence on the other end of the line. Then she told me, and I swear I'll never forget her exact words. She said, "I needed to feel alive again. Stephen, you're never home. Always working. Not even a, 'I'm sorry,' not a real apology, just justifications and blame directed at me." Turns out the guy's name was Marcus. He owned a pretty big landscaping company in the area. He had money. A lot of money. Angela confessed to me that they'd been seeing each other for over a year, that he made her feel special, that he bought her things and took her to nice places. I asked her if she ever thought about our kids, about the 25 years we'd been together, and she just said that these things happen and that she couldn't control what she felt. The conversation ended with me hanging up the phone because I literally couldn't keep listening to her. What happened next was, honestly, almost worse than discovering the affair. I decided to talk to Daniel and Rebecca. They were already adults. Daniel was 27 and Rebecca was 25. I thought they'd understand, that they'd at least support me a little. I met them at a neutral coffee shop. I didn't want to do this at the family home, and I told them everything. I explained that their mother had had an affair, that I had discovered it, that divorce was inevitable. And honestly, I expected some empathy. Maybe a hug? I don't know. Something that told me I was still their father and that they cared about what was happening to me. But no, what I got was totally different. Rebecca looked at me like I was the problem and said, "Mom already told us her version. She says you neglected her for years, that you were never present." Daniel nodded and added something like, "She deserves to be happy, Dad. Maybe if you'd been home more, this wouldn't have happened." I sat there, with my coffee getting cold in my hands, trying to process that my own children were blaming me for their mother's infidelity. I told them, "But I was working to give you a good life, to pay for college, so you wouldn't lack anything." And Rebecca just shrugged and said, "Money isn't everything, Dad." The thing is, from that moment on, the relationship with my kids started to deteriorate rapidly. They went to live with Angela, which, well, the house was technically hers too, so it made sense, but they completely left me out. I tried calling them, sending them messages, inviting them to dinner, but they always had excuses. "Mom needs us now, we're busy, maybe another day." And Marcus, that damn Marcus, became some kind of replacement father figure for them, which destroyed me every time I thought about it. About 6 months after the divorce, Rebecca called me, and I thought, well, she's finally going to acknowledge that I was the one who suffered here, that her mother did something horrible. But no, she called to tell me she'd gotten engaged and was getting married. I told her I was happy for her, asking when the wedding was, thinking about how I could help pay for things, everything a father is supposed to do. And then she said, in a totally cold voice, that Marcus was going to walk her down the aisle. That he'd been more of a father to her in the last few months than I had been in my entire life. And that basically I wasn't invited. I wasn't invited to my own daughter's wedding. I felt like someone had hit me in the stomach with a baseball bat. I asked her if she was serious, if she was really excluding me from the most important day of her life, and she just said yes. That was her decision, and she hoped I'd respect it. I hung up the phone, and I think I sat in my apartment for hours, just staring at the wall, wondering at what point I completely lost my family. But wait, because the story gets worse. A year later, Daniel also got married, and guess who wasn't invited either? Me. My son, whom I raised, whom I taught to ride a bike, whom I helped with his homework for years, completely excluded me from his wedding too. I found out through Facebook, can you believe it? I saw the wedding photos, saw Marcus there as if he were the proud father, and I was miles away, completely erased from their lives. So 8 years passed like that, 8 years, with minimal or no contact with my kids. I tried the first few times to keep communicating, but eventually I realized it was useless. They had chosen their side. They had decided I was the villain of this story, and nothing I said was going to change that. So I concentrated on my work. I threw myself headfirst into my career because it was the only thing that made sense in my life at that time. And honestly, work was my salvation. I met Patrick, a colleague who had become a good friend, and we decided to start our own tech consulting company. It was risky, I guess, leaving a stable job to venture into something new, but I felt I needed to do something different, something that was completely mine. And it worked. It worked better than either of us expected. In 5 years, our small 2-person company became a consulting firm with 30 employees and contracts with major clients. I went from being an IT employee making a decent salary to being the director of a successful company, and I'm not going to lie, it felt incredibly good to prove to myself that I could do it. About 3 years ago, I met Elena at a networking event. She was a widow, had lost her husband in a car accident a few years before, and we connected immediately. It wasn't one of those movie romances where you fall in love at first sight. It was more of a gradual connection of two people who had been through difficult situations and understood each other's pain. We got married after a year of dating, and 2 years ago, we had Mia, my baby daughter. And look, I never thought I was going to be a father again at my age, but Mia is, literally, one of the best things that's ever happened to me. Elena gave me a second chance to have a family that really valued and loved me. So there I was, finally in a good place in my life after almost a decade of total shit. I had a successful business, an incredible wife, a beautiful daughter, a nice house in a good neighborhood. I had made peace with the fact that Daniel and Rebecca didn't want to be part of my life, and although it hurt, I had learned to live with it. Until 3 months ago, on a Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. There they were, Daniel and Rebecca, standing on my porch after 8 years of basically pretending I didn't exist. And the first thing I thought was, something bad happened. Someone died. Because why else would they show up out of nowhere like this? Daniel spoke first, said, "Hi, Dad. We need to talk to you." And I just stood there, in total shock, because they didn't even know where I lived. They must have researched my address to find me. I let them in, mostly because Elena was behind me and she's too polite to leave them at the door, and we sat in the living room. It was incredibly awkward. 8 years of silence, and suddenly we're all sitting in my living room as if we were a normal family. Rebecca saw photos of Mia on the wall and said, "So you have another daughter now?" And I just nodded because I didn't know what to say to that. After a few minutes of forced and superficial conversation, Daniel finally got to the point. He said that Marcus, the wonderful Marcus who had taken them in as his own children, had had problems with his business. The economy had hit him hard. He lost several important contracts and eventually had to file for bankruptcy. And when Marcus lost his money, he also lost his interest in Angela, and, by extension, in my children. He basically abandoned them, left town with another younger woman, and never contacted them again. And now that Marcus wasn't around, now that there was no one else to turn to, they finally remembered they had a father. Rebecca told me, with tears in her eyes that didn't convince me one bit, that they had made a mistake, that they should have listened to me years ago, that they regretted everything that had happened. Daniel added that they were both going through financial difficulties, that they had children of their own. Now children I had never met, by the way, and that they needed help. I asked them, with a calm I didn't feel at all, why they thought I was going to help them after everything. Rebecca looked at me as if the question were absurd and said, "Because you're our father, because family helps each other." And I almost laughed in her face. Because seriously? Now I'm their father? Now family matters? I told them I needed time to think, that this was a lot to process, and basically got them out of my house with vague promises to talk later. Elena found me that night sitting in my office, looking at old photos of when Daniel and Rebecca were children, and she asked me what I was going to do. I told her I didn't know. That part of me wanted to help them because they're my children, but that another part, a bigger part, was furious that they only came to me when they needed me. She hugged me and told me to take the time I needed to decide, that she'd support me in whatever I decided. But it didn't end there, because a week later, Daniel and Rebecca showed up at my office, at my workplace, in the middle of a meeting with an important client. My assistant tried to stop them, but they just walked in, interrupting my presentation, saying they needed to talk to me urgently. I had to excuse myself to my client, leave the conference room with them, and when I asked them what the hell they were doing, Rebecca pulled out photos of her children, my grandchildren I'd never met, and said, "These kids need a grandfather, Dad, they need stability." It was a manipulative move, using their kids like that, and I knew it. I told them they couldn't just show up in my life, demanding things after years of silence. That if they wanted to rebuild a relationship with me, it was going to take time and effort on their part, not just showing up when they needed money. Daniel got angry and told me I'd always been a selfish father, that even now that they had the chance to fix things, I was putting conditions on it. I kicked them out of my office and asked them not to show up again without warning. A couple of days later, I received an email from both of them, a long email, where they supposedly apologized for everything, saying they'd been fools, that Angela had lied to them about many things, that Marcus had filled their heads with wrong ideas about me. They said they wanted to start over, that they wanted me to meet their children, that they wanted to be a family again. And at the end of the email, almost as an afterthought, they mentioned they had a business idea, and if I could consider them as investment partners. That's when I saw everything clearly. When I understood that this whole reconciliation wasn't about fixing our relationship, but about accessing my money and my success. I took a full week to really think about this. Talked to Elena, talked to Patrick, even considered talking to a therapist. And in the end, I came to the conclusion that I didn't owe them anything, that the fact that they were my biological children didn't give them automatic rights to my life, especially after how they treated me. I blocked their numbers, sent them the final email telling them I respected that they made their own decisions years ago, and that now I was making mine, and that decision was to move forward without them. I told them that if they ever wanted to have a real relationship with me, one based on love and not financial need, we could talk, but that until then, I didn't want to hear from them. It was hard, really hard to write that email, because part of me will always want to have my children in my life, but I knew it was the right thing to do. What happened next? Well, I didn't expect it at all. 2 weeks ago, the doorbell rang again, and when I opened the door, there was Angela. She looked very different from how I remembered her. Older, more tired, and definitely less put together. She told me she needed to talk to me, that Marcus had left her with nothing, that she was living in a small apartment with a roommate because she couldn't pay the rent alone, that Daniel and Rebecca had told her I had refused to help them. Angela started apologizing, saying she had made the biggest mistake of her life, that she should never have cheated on me, that Marcus turned out to be a liar and a manipulator, that now she understood what she had lost. She said she missed me, that she missed our life together, that she wanted to see if there was any chance we could try again. And while she talked, while tears ran down her face, all I could think about was how she never cried when she confessed the affair to me, how she never really apologized until she lost everything. I told her, in a very calm voice, that no, there was no chance of us getting back together, that I had rebuilt my life, that I had a family that loved and respected me, that her regret had come about 9 years too late. She tried to take my hand and I told her not to touch me, to please leave and not come back. And then I closed the door. I stood there on the other side of the door for a minute, listening to her walk away, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Not the fake peace of pretending everything was okay, but the genuine peace of knowing I had made the right decision. I went back inside where Elena was playing with Mia in the living room, and I sat with them, and I thought, this is my family now. This is the life I chose to build after everything fell apart. Does it still hurt what happened with Daniel and Rebecca? Of course it does. I think it will always hurt a little. But I learned that you can't force people to value you, not even if they're your own blood. They made their decisions when they needed me as their father, and I made mine now that they need me as their bank. And I guess at the end of the day, I'm at peace with that.